want to say again, hello if you're downstairs in the crypt. I hope you're having a good service down there. You're enjoying the coffee and the comfortable sofas and the good-looking worship team. And I want to say hello as well if you're listening online. And it's great to be part of a community that's much bigger than the physical location of Bristol. And God bless you, particularly to you, Dave Churchill, if you're listening tonight. God bless you. We're doing a series in Mark's Gospel, and, you know, by some chance, we're on that part in Mark's Gospel where it talks about Jesus praying. So I'm going to read to you from Mark chapter 1, verses 35 to 39. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone's looking for you." And Jesus replied, "Let us go somewhere else to the nearby villages so I can preach there also. That's why I've come." So he traveled throughout Galilee, preaching in the synagogues and driving out demons. It's a well-known passage, and I guess we know that Jesus got up early and prayed, and that Jesus loved to pray, and that we often see Jesus in prayer. And that's so familiar that we can just say, and we all know we should pray. You know, if I ask you to put your hands up, who feels they should pray more in this building tonight? And probably all of you put your hands up. So what are we going to get from here that's going to actually make a difference to us as we go into prayer week? And there are just a few things I've thought of tonight. And the first thing is, Jesus went to pray at a highly stressed and difficult time. The context of his praying has been that he's been in the home of Simon and Andrew in Capernaum, where they often went to stay. And it's been a ministry time which has gone incredibly well. You know, Simon's mother's been healed. There's been people healed of sickness and delivered from evil spirits. It says the whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He drove out many demons, and he wouldn't allow them to speak because they knew who he was. So it's been an incredibly busy, successful time, tiring. And Jesus has got up early to go and take some time out by himself to pray. And I suppose that the first thing that's an obvious thing to say really, though, is if Jesus went to pray by himself, I think of Jesus as a person whose communion with the Father was perfect. That the best role model for someone living a life of prayer who knew the voice of God, knew the voice of the Spirit at all times, all over the place, is Jesus. And so I ask myself, if Jesus went away to pray, and he's the one with the best communion with God, the best communication with God, what does that say about the need for solitude in prayer? And what does it say to me? I think it says, first of all, that in order to hear God properly, we need to create space. And even for Jesus to go deep with God, to have deep times with God, needed the physical space of going away and making privacy. Jesus was big on this, wasn't he? When he taught about prayer, he said, when you pray, go into your room on your own and talk to your Father in secret. He was big on secret, solitary praying. We often find him praying by himself early in the morning in places which is away from the hustle and bustle. So Jesus didn't just do that because it was convenient, because he did it because it was vital. Jonathan Burnside was talking at our morning service about listening prayer, and he said a very sensible thing. He said, when we make time to be still, to be in communion with God, to listen to God, we become present to our soul. We become aware of all the noises, all the voices that well up from our emotional life. There's a lot of baggage to get rid of, not just the human baggage of people around us, but our own baggage if we're going to listen from God, our anxieties, our fears, our hopes, our dreams. To take time, to take stillness, to really listen, if you're human, takes time, because there is a lot of stuff going on in here. And it's not the same as the voice of the Spirit. So we have to process that. Maybe even Jesus had to process that. So I guess Jesus did it because he wanted to hear clearly and not be distracted. And the second thing, I suppose, about the time he took away is he wanted to be intimate with the Father. He wanted to enjoy him. It was refreshing for him to be with the Father. And even though it meant getting up early after physical tiredness, there was something life-giving about his time with the Father. Now, you know Pam Scott Cook, and you know what a gregarious soul that she is. She likes being with people. She doesn't like to miss a party. She likes to be where the action is. And over the last year, she's had a bit more flexibility in her timetable. And one thing that she's chosen to do is not to come to our Woodlands team meetings on a Monday morning, in spite of the fact that lots of us are there who are her friends. We have a really good time. We have cake. We have inspiring stories. We have fun. We have gossip. We have all sorts of stuff. And Pam, this year, has chosen to go away on her own and have time just with the Father. We've said, oh, Pam, will you come to staff meetings more often? She says, I wouldn't trade what I've got. I like coming with you guys. I'll come from time to time, but I wouldn't trade what I've discovered, this one-on-one relationship with the Father, these special times. It's refreshing to go away and be by himself. And as I think about prayer, I'm asking myself, am I like a lover wanting to be alone with their beloved? Am I wanting to have like a date night with God? Excuse the analogy, but is it that compelling? Is it that wonderful? Is it that refreshing that I want to make time to go away and be with him? I think the great mystics in prayer who practice listening prayer often use that sort of language, actually, romantic, erotic language even, because for them, the beloved was a divine compulsion. And they wanted to be with him. They would write from prison cells and talk about this kind of the favour, the beauty of being alone with God. Probably most of us don't reckon we're anywhere near where that place is, but we'll grow in a relationship with God by cultivating, by spending time. And I suppose the other thing just to say about Jesus going up very early and leaving for a solitary place is the wilderness place for Jesus. Earlier on in the chapter had been a place where he'd wrestled with temptation and pressure. And the solitary place isn't always an easy place. And yet, in that place of wrestling in the wilderness, which we read about earlier on in Mark chapter 1, it says this, the Spirit led him into the desert, the wilderness is the same word. He was in the desert for 40 days being tempted by Satan. He was with the wild animals and angels attended him. There's something about the wrestling which means there's a spiritual experience going on that's very significant in this solitary place. And I think I already said to you that when you're on your own, when you make a still place in your life, things bubble up. And you might find that where you've gone to pray and be quiet, you're besieged sometimes with thoughts, anxieties, temptations of all kinds. And there's some wrestling going on. But what happens in those times is a mirror that helps you realize what you need to give to God. If when you make time to pray, all you can think about is how much money you've got in the bank, that's an area of surrender. If when you make time to pray and to be still and quiet, all that happens is that your sexuality becomes very lively, that's what you become aware of, that's an area of surrender and consecration to God. If when you make time to be alone, your fears, your insecurities, your bitternesses rise to the surface, disturb your mind, that's not necessarily a bad thing at all. That's a place of processing the things you need to God. And that might look like being tempted at times, but it also might look like a place where there are wild animals. There's stuff happening, there's justice around, it's kind of things. But it's also a place where you may find that angels attend you. And you can bring to God the things that come up, that really need to be brought to God, that you've never actually brought to him. Here's a final thing about the solitary place that Jesus finds himself in. It says, the guy's feet, Simon, says, look, everyone's looking for you, Jesus. Does that remind you? Perhaps it reminds you of Luke 2, where Jesus has again disappeared and everyone was looking for him. His mum and dad are looking for him. And he says to them, didn't you know I'd be in my Father's house? And it has some of that sense about it, doesn't it, this phrase? Everyone's looking for you. But Jesus' priority is not people. Jesus' priority is the will of God, the will of his Father. And he puts that before people because when he puts that before people, it helps him to properly serve people. I'll just say that again. For Jesus, the priority of God is above the priority for people. And the priority for God helps him to serve people properly. And for many of us, caught up in busyness, in activity, the solution to problems that we see around us is, I'm going to work harder. I'm going to give more. Jesus could have been completely overwhelmed day one. The whole town has gathered for ministry. And the priority could have been, I'm going to pray for everyone I can tonight. I'm going to get some sleep and I'll start again in the morning and start praying for them. I was with someone today who was describing their place of burnout that they're in as a busy doctor who's overcommitted, overworked, trying to be a solution to the problems they're facing. We can do that so easily. But actually, if we make God our priority, seeking him, finding both his refreshment and his empowering, it will help us to do what we're called to do more thoroughly. That's why people like John Wesley, who had incredibly busy lives, would wake up and get up early to pray. That's why Bill Hybels, an incredibly busy leader, wrote a book called Too Busy Not to Pray. That's why the priority of God needs to be our priority in ministry. That's why for us as we start 2012 as a church community, to give time to pray so that we're coming out of that place. And we're recognizing that we can't do it actually. Unless God builds a house, we labor in vain. Unless we have that attitude, we're going to miss it and we're going to run the risk of burnout. Okay, so let's look some more at the context of prayer. That was Jesus' priority of prayer. But the context of prayer is one which actually is a challenging start to ministry. Mark 1, early on, verse 14, it says, after John was put in prison, Jesus went into Galilee. Jesus' ministry started with pressure from the political powers. It started with the one who prepared the way for him, the one whose message he was carrying, gets put in prison and later gets beheaded. And when Jesus sends his followers into that environment, he says, I'm sending you out like sheep amongst wolves. It's a heavy environment. It's challenging. It's dangerous. The second thing we know in Mark's gospel when Jesus starts his ministry is that evil spirits are everywhere. The first miracle that Jesus does in Mark's gospel is to drive out a demon. And the bits that you've just heard me read, there are evil spirits. And there's a sense the spiritual atmosphere is heavy with darkness. And there's this wearing stuff. There are these kind of oppressed people shouting out, interrupting. There's a sense of the confrontation, the battling that Jesus does as he looks at these powers and tells them to submit to the authority of God. And then there's the pressure of people wanting a pound of flesh, wanting their bit of you, want my bit of Jesus. Those are big pressures. And the other pressure that's there is the pressure of success. You know, people are crowding around, people are captivated by him, people are spreading the word. Come and hear the teacher. He's got authority. We've not heard someone like this before. Look what he's done. And there's a kind of favor and a success which has its own pressure. And in those circumstances where there is trouble, where there's a sense of the pressure of evil, the evil powers, where there are people pressures and when there is success, what Jesus knows he needs to do is to pray. And my simple and obvious question to you tonight is, how many people have ever been in trouble or danger of any sort? Who's in that situation at the moment? How many people have ever been successful? How many people have ever been busy? How many people have ever been aware of a sense of darkness? If you are in any of those situations, the biblical picture, that just a simple thing to do is to pray. This morning I was speaking here and I was saying that the Bible is full of people praying because they're in trouble. And I made the kind of point, and it's a serious point, we don't get ourselves in trouble enough, which is often why we don't pray enough. The psalmists are often in trouble. They're saying, Lord, hear my prayer, I'm in big trouble. The New Testament church are always getting in trouble because of the kingdom. They're always being chased out of this town. Paul's always got people on his back. They're being persecuted. They're deprived in all kinds of ways. They have pressure, and they're always praying. Because they're in trouble, they pray, and when they pray, God acts, and they get delivered from their trouble, so they get into more trouble, and they pray more. And I think we're not in nearly enough trouble as a church. And when we are in trouble, we do pray. When people in this church are diagnosed with cancer, we get around them and pray. I don't know if some of you might remember praying for Mandy Addison, having an incredible time praying with her, or for Kirsty Cleverly. Some of you will remember that, the time put into praying for her. We do that, don't we? We pray when we're in trouble. When I was running the Methodist Centre down in Old Market, in the centre of Bristol, surrounded by darkness that was quite tangible, the massage parlours, the drug dealers, the homeless. And when those sort of people came into my centre every day, I knew that I had to pray. And so I did. My week always started getting in early to pray, and then at the end of the week asking people to join me in something which I called Watch and Pray, a prayer meeting, because to do that work, I didn't have the resources to meet the needs of the people coming in through the doorways. We didn't have the resources. It had to be God. And I'd get myself into trouble sometimes. And I'd go on adventures to go down to St. Paul's at midnight to recover a stolen computer from the people who'd nicked it off my centre. Or challenged by a drug dealer whose girlfriend I'd got into a dry house. He said, right, you better watch your back now. And when you're in trouble because of the sake of the kingdom, you pray and you get people to pray for you. I get scared by stuff. I think, God, I need people praying for me. And we're not in enough trouble because we're not challenging the powers enough. Jesus was challenging the powers. And they're everywhere in Mark's gospel. And he says, pray. I don't think Jesus is, when he teaches his disciples to pray, the sort of things he says to them. He says, watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. At the place of Gethsemane where he's about to be arrested, what does he say? You need to pray, guys. There's trouble coming. Or when he looks at the busyness and the ministry, he says to the disciples, ask the Lord of the harvest to send laborers into the harvest field. Do you think Jesus hasn't already prayed that prayer himself? When he called the 12 and sent them out, that came after a night of prayer. And Jesus had been talking to the Father. Father, it's too much. There's a world to win. And the Father saying, these are the 12 I want you to send to the harvest field. You call them by name and then send them out. And he's telling them to do the same. He's reproducing for them his own prayer life. And Jesus is the one who's praying, Father, what are you doing? What's on your heart? On that early morning, at the start of Jesus' ministry, when he goes and prays, he's not just asking God for stuff, he's listening to God. That's why he's made the quiet. That's why he's wanted to make a still place. Because he needs to know, Lord, where do I go from here? This is happening, and it looks good. I'm in the middle of a revival, but what do you want to do? Do you know, in the New Testament, people are often leaving a revival because God's called them to do something different. Do you remember Philip? There he is at Samaria, and it's all happening. There's a huge revival there. He's been preaching, and people have got baptized. Simon Magus, the magicians, got baptized. There's all kinds of stuff. And the Spirit of God says to Philip, right, go on the desert road. There's someone I want you to meet there. And he meets the Ethiopian eunuch in his chariot, reading the book of Isaiah from a scroll, and leads him to the Lord. And this guy eventually goes back to the kingdom of Ethiopia, which becomes the reggae capital of the world. No, it becomes you know what happens? The oldest Christian nation, perhaps, kingdom. Because someone was listening to God in the middle of a revival. Said, what are you doing? Someone who's been discipled in prayer. And here's Jesus praying, Father, what are you doing? We know that Jesus prayed like that because as he talks about what he's doing, he says, I only do what I see the Father doing. John's Gospel. You know, the Father loves the Son and tells him what he's going to do. He shows him things. And the Father said to Jesus, look, Son, you're my anointed one. You're my Messiah. You're the one who's fulfilling all that's been in my purposes for Israel, to be a light and a blessing and salvation to the Gentiles. You've got a mission to do. You've got to go to the villages and towns of Galilee. You've got to speak to people. In 3 years' time, you've got to go to Jerusalem. You've got to set your face like a flint for that journey. But it's not your time to go there yet. Right now, you've got to speak about me and build some disciples. You've got to start to prepare a people who are going to be that new people of God, that church that I'm raising up, that one day will come. And those 12 that you call, they're going to be apostles and leaders of that church. They're going to be like the new Israel. But they're not going to confine the message to one physical geographical nation. They're going to go to the ends of the earth. One day, you're going to send those people to every nation. And the Father and the Son were having those dialogues and conversations. So Jesus knew what he was doing. Why does Jesus pray? In what context does Jesus pray? And how does he pray? He prays with listening and asking. And for us, as we go into prayer week, we want to do both. So we've got these wonderful dedicated spaces in our prayer room where if you go there, it'll be like your little wilderness place. It'll be a bit more comfortable, probably. There'll be beautiful things around and there'll be things to help you pray. But it might be a place where you particularly want to go and listen. Away from from the distractions. Maybe you want to listen to what's in your own heart. Who am I, God? Maybe you want to listen to the whispers that the Spirit drops into your heart. And also over prayer week, we want to be asking. It's not that we ask too much as Christians. We don't ask enough. You're never told off in the Bible for asking. Jesus loves the people who ask. The blind man that says, Son of David, have mercy on me, and everyone wants to shut him up. Jesus says, bring him here. Jesus says, always pray and never give up. Ask, seek, and you'll find. He talks about the widow and the one in Luke 18 who's looking for mercy from the unjust judge and keeps on harassing him. And Jesus said, look, if that's how she behaves and gets mercy, how much more will your Father bless you? But will I find faith on earth? Will I find people who know that I want to bless and who are asking and knocking and seeking? Will I find that? Will I find people whose hearts are changed by the way that they pray? If you really pray, you can't leave that prayer unchanged. If you really pray, you find yourself in a relationship with the Father that's sweet. Lord, help us to pray. And Lord, teach us to pray. All right. So I hope we'll see you around praying. Praying for yourselves and praying for other people and praying for our city and praying for the wider world and praying for the persecuted church and praying for all kinds of things. I hope I'll see you Sunday by Sunday praying for people who show up here and need prayer. One of the great privileges of my life is praying for people. And I don't know why more people don't do it. Because it's such a privilege to take time with someone and to listen to their story and to invite the Spirit of God to come and answer their prayers. And we're going to take a chance tonight to pray for people. And you might want to pray, or we might want to be prayed for. But we've been spending some time listening to God. Some of the ministry team have done some listening already. And they've got some things to share, which Claire's got. So I'm going to hand back to Claire and to Martin, and we'll have a chance, as we finish our service tonight, to do some praying. Is that all right?